Tansei gamers, I thought we'd have a look at sentient weapons, and why would we want to do that? Well, I've probably mentioned on more than one occasion that I've written a book about NPCs, and I like NPCs because they add some unpredictability, some randomness. Um, it's an element beyond just having monsters and traps and things. It's something that the players can't control. It's something that the players have to. They can be a puzzle, and it's one thing when the puzzle is just trying to work out a relationship with another human being, another humanoid, I guess, in this game. But so much more interesting when it's a non-living creature, or a non-living entity, I suppose, is a better thing. And so I've always loved the idea of sentient weapons. It's one of the favorite things that I liked about, I guess, the advanced version of the Dungeons and Dragons game. And yeah, I thought we'd just have a quick look through the supplement by Chris Garman. Anyway, and maybe I'll read, just for a change of pace. So he writes, some magic weapons have an intelligence all their own. Only weapons proper, i.e. not ammunition, so sling bullets and arrows, that sort of thing. No, they're not sentient. They will be intelligent, and it is unusual for sentient weapons to be smaller than a short sword. So I guess there's no sentient daggers. But you're the game master. Your mileage may vary. Sentient weapons have extra abilities and sometimes extraordinary powers and special purposes. In general, less than 1% of eligible magic weapons have intelligence, and it's recommended that the GM place each one specially, and not give them out as part of randomly generated treasures. Yeah, they really should be something rare, unique, and special, and not just some random treasure that you've generated that someone could find just by stumbling over it. As a player, I've experienced encountering something in the game that I could see there that was a little special thing that my dungeon master had made especially for me. And that's not even me thinking back to me as a 10-year-old or, the younger version of me that played this game as a wide-eyed kid. But within the last 3 years, when I re-entered the hobby after, basically a 30-year break, I was going to be the tank, I guess, and the dungeon master in question really wanted to make sure that I would be well equipped to be able to take care of the party. But, and he did a great job of surprising me with it too. In any case, this weapon had its own personality, and we have a very strange, generally cooperative, but at times contentious relationship. And that's a joy I suggest that every dungeon master shares with his players. Anyway, let's continue. Sentient weapons, also called intelligent weapons, do not have the same sort of sentience as ordinary creatures. So they're not capable of extended thinking or planning or any sort of design or engineering tasks. They have poor memories, and a very old weapon might remember only its most famous or infamous wielders and only significant events during its history with that previous owner. So you cannot rely on them to be a memory keeper. For people that have difficulty remembering what happened in the previous adventure, just get into the habit of making notes. If you're doing it using Roll20 or something like that, write a summary in the channel. It'll be there waiting for you the next time you come back to the game. But in any case, you can't ask your sword to describe you what was happening. Give me a refresh on what's just occurred. And by the same token, I guess maybe there's some forgiveness built in there, because unless you do something really rotten, chances are it'll just kind of disappear. It's ephemeral. Weapon affiliation or purpose. So they're created for a specific purpose. And this is manifested as an affiliation. It may be affiliated with a religious association, a specific race, or some other group or order. And an affiliated weapon will prefer to be utilized by members of that group and will avoid working against the interests of that group. So, yeah. You cannot steal, maybe steal is too strong a word. If you find something in a temple that is designed to uphold the purpose of that temple, what it stands for, you could not ever use that weapon to harm probably anyone in that temple, or even once you leave that area, anyone that's affiliated with that temple. So should they send clerics after you to retrieve the stolen weapon that you stole from the temple, that weapon will go to lengths to make sure that it does not cause any harm towards the rightful owners, which are just trying to return it back from whence it was stolen. So anyway, you can already, we're barely, half a page in, and it's already exciting just how much fun a dungeon master, a game master, what have you, can have with this rogue item, this interesting personality here that will allow itself to be used in certain hands for certain purposes. For an example, so a weapon affiliated to the elves of the White Forest might permit a human to use it if no better choice is available, but the weapon would still resist being used against the elves of the White Forest. And conceivably might try to figure out how to find its way into an elf, into their hands, if such an opportunity presented itself. Alternately, a sentient weapon might be created to follow some particular philosophy or mission, and the wielder of such a weapon must behave in support of the weapon's philosophy or mission, or in the very least not against it, in order to be granted the advantages that the weapon possesses. So much to say that it may not function as a +1, +2 weapon anymore if it has any sort of special powers. Maybe those don't function when clearly the person wielding it is violating its philosophy or its mission. Some sentient weapons also have a specific purpose, typically to fight some particular type of foe, and that's very, very common. In Chrysogon's coterie, there are a number of weapons with special purposes that have special abilities. Generally it's a +1, +3. +1 against any common enemy, +3 against, lycanthropes, for example. Obviously, the affiliation and purpose of the weapon must not conflict. For example, a weapon might have been created to defend elves from trolls. Thus, if the weapon is affiliated with the elves, but fighting trolls is its purpose, the weapon will prefer to act in accordance with its purpose. For example, the aforementioned elf-made weapon created to fight trolls would prefer to be in the hands of an elf warrior fighting trolls. But in the absence of a troll fight, the weapon will find fighting orcs or dragons equally acceptable, although not necessarily at the same bonus, just as it would likely tolerate being used by a human in the absence of a qualified elf. So there's no table or die roll to determine whether or not a sentient weapon has a purpose. That's up to the GM to decide. And that's correct. If you go to the tools, there's a tools page at basicfantasy.org. There is an NPC rolling link where just by choosing a class and a level, it will provide a fully equipped character, including things like armor and weapons. And it will provide like those +1, +3 special purpose weapons occasionally, as I suggested. But it'll call it, +1, +3 versus special enemy. And it really is up to the dungeon master to determine, well, what is that special enemy going to be? And if you're doing it correctly, which is to say, you are putting this in a special place intended to be found by the party, and probably you have a certain person in mind as far as who would be the wielder of that weapon. You know, based on, I don't know, the campaign that you have planned ahead, what's the best special enemy to define that's going to be make that weapon as helpful as possible. So a sentient weapon which does not like its wielder may choose to hide its nature, pretending to be a common sort of magic weapon. Or as I suggested earlier, it may flip that ability on or off, or refuse to hand out some of its special purposes or its full amount of damage. Alternately, such a weapon may choose to inflict damage directly on the wielder when it is drawn or handled, doing 2d4 points of fire or electrical damage per round, so long as it's held. So, yeah, it may become superheated, burn your hands, force you to drop it. And ostensibly, maybe even if you are playing by the rules, but it sees, I was made by the elves, I am here to uphold the elven people, and you find yourself in the presence of an elf that the weapon thinks it might be a more suitable wielder. It may burn the player in order to be dropped to try to get itself in the hands of that preferred wielder. A sentient weapon may even choose to act as a cursed weapon with a penalty equal to its usual bonus. So -2 versus +2, for example. And then one final option is for it to attempt to control the unwanted wielder. And this is where it becomes very, very fascinating, where it's a contest of wills. And there's a calculator here. This is the part that I find fascinating. Tread carefully here. Like, you want to have fun with the players, but you don't want to, don't mess with them. It's you'll find yourself with an empty table, I suppose, if you overdo this. But you can be playful and you can be appropriate. I find that playing God, as in the, I don't mean any disrespect religiously, but I'm talking about in terms of being the person that is in control of the universe that the players function within. It's a balancing act. You clearly are in control of the game, and you can really do anything you want to, but people can vote with their feet. They can also decide that they don't like the way that you're managing the game because you're picking on them. You're being too, You're abusing your power as the ultimate power in their universe, and they'll find some other universe that they'd rather play in much easier. In any case, all right. You can use it as a teachable moment. You can use it to add a little bit of fun and unpredictability. Don't use it to torture your players. You probably know this, and I'm lecturing you for no good reason. Ignore me. So, looking at this intelligence of weapon table here, you can roll a straight d20 to determine the intelligence and how many lesser or greater powers that it possesses. Weapons with less than 9 intelligence can communicate by means of empathy, as in the possessor feels urges and sometimes emotions from the weapon that encourage or discourage certain courses of action. So it's just a sensation. I feel like I should attack this creature. I feel like, I should extend warmth and gratitude and assistance to this race. The weapon can understand the intent or desire of the wielder with some limitations, but any weapon with an intelligence of 9 or higher will be able to speak. I guess you can determine whether or not it speaks a common language. Well, let's keep reading. I'm going to stop guessing and I'm just going to press through. It's been a while since I read this. Sentient weapons which can speak will know common or the racial language of the weapon's creator, so potentially Elvish or Dwarvish. If that is different from common, as well as one additional language per point of intelligence above 9. Choose appropriate languages taking into account the weapon's origin, affiliation, and purpose, if any. So it would make a lot of sense, I guess, to speak a lot of common adventure or humanoid languages so that it has a better chance of communicating with the wielder. On the other hand, I can foresee an interesting scenario in which something that's created to dislike a certain kind of creature, like orcs or something, or goblins, may speak Orcish or Goblin so as to hurl or insult or incite conflict with those races, to make them want to attack the sword because the sword wants to kill the orcs or the goblins or what have you. It's fun, isn't it? Isn't it fun, the things you can imagine? I do love this game. So anyway, take that into account. Yes, the obvious thing is to make it be able to communicate with as many players as possible, but you can also have it understand and be able to communicate with the things that it hates. A sentient weapon typically has about the same visual and auditory abilities as its creator had, so a human-made weapon cannot see in the dark, but elven or dwarven weapons have dark vision. A sentient weapon may also have powers granting additional sensory abilities. And then here's the lesser and greater powers coming up. Lesser swords are primarily detection. Greater powers are, in effect, spells. So that's a nice, simple way of differentiating those two things. So a detection ability or a full-blown spell as a lesser or greater power. Each sentient weapon, which also has greater powers, will be able to activate each up to 3 times per day for at most 1d4 plus 1 turns each time. Though the sword chooses when to use its powers, the sword chooses when to use its powers. The wielder may be arrogant enough to think, well, I will hold this, I will wield this, I will invoke the power, and make that request to the dungeon master. The dungeon master should know better. Again, adding some unpredictability, adding some conflict, some gentle conflict between the desires of the wielder and the desires or intentions of the weapon. It adds fun to your game. Once activated by the weapon, the powers do become under the control of the wielder. So, for example, the wielder controls any illusions created by the phantasmal force, greater ability. A list of suggested greater powers is provided. Okay, so under lesser powers, we have detecting gems and jewels, detecting illusions, invisibility, magic, metal, secret doors, shifting walls and rooms, detecting sloping passages, and detecting traps. So I can think of a particular character in Chrysogon's Coterie who was a dwarven character who had the natural special abilities that dwarves have as far as being able to see in the dark and detecting changes in construction and such, and had a weapon that had all these same powers, and despite the fact that the weapon was aware that the player had the same powers, this weapon was extraordinarily proud of the fact that it possessed these powers. Ed would announce proudly things that it could see in the dark and things that it could detect, even though the wielder of the weapon had the ability, already knew all the news that it was receiving from this weapon. And I just think that made for a charming dynamic between the two of them. So, anyway. Ideally, a weapon is held by someone that can really benefit from the special powers, but it can be hilarious. Well, I thought it was hilarious. What do I know? That's how I wrote it that way. No, I'm not going to tell you. You have to find it. Look in the book. I think it's a pretty good book. Greater powers. Clairaudience, as in the potion. Clairvoyance, as in the spell. So, it's clear. We've left the detection zone, and now we're into these spell-like powers for greater powers. ESP, which is actually, that's now called mind reading as of 4th edition. We're trying to take out there I go again, we the community. We're trying to take out some of the sci-fi, non-fantasy sounding verbiage, and that's one change that was made for 4th edition. Flying, as in the spell. Cure Light Wounds, as in the spell. Levitation, Phantasmal Force, Telepathy, Teleport, and X-Ray Vision. So, basically this can function the same way as a ring, or a spell, or a helmet, or a potion, depending on which power you roll. Doing it randomly could make a lot of sense, but again, if you are not treating this as some sort of a random piece of treasure, but in fact putting something into an environment that you know is going to be useful to help your players survive this very, very dangerous but hilarious and fun game, that may just be an indication of a power that you might go to. If it's generic enough, you might go with your first roll, or you might pick something off the list knowing that this will be an especially important power for these characters to survive this upcoming adventure. So, and now here it is. The wrestling for control. Ego is a measure of the total power and force of personality that a sentient weapon possesses. To calculate a sentient weapon's ego, a little bit of math, add together its intelligence and combat bonus. So if it's a intelligence of 11 and it's a +1, there you go. I have to learn not to talk with my hands. Don't bang your microphone. +1 point each for each lesser power, and 2 points each for each greater power. So 4 things to add up. For weapons having more than one combat bonus, which is the special enemy thing that I was talking about earlier, the weapon's ego may actually change when in the presence of creatures that would receive the higher figure. So yes, if it's specially designed to kill undead or to kill lycanthropes or some such, its ego will jump that extra 2 points from the +1 standard to the +3 against the special enemy in the presence of those creatures, which can create some interesting conflicts should the player decide that they don't wish to face this particular foe, and not because they're scared, not because they would necessarily avoid conflict. Maybe at this particular time that person is badly injured and they're actually trying to get away. They're trying to flee in order to be able to get some healing. But anyway, that's the conflict that happens when you have intelligent items in the hands of players. There's a conflict of priorities. So consider a +1 longsword, which is +3 versus regenerators in the presence of trolls. The sword's ego will rise 2 points during that proximity. A sentient weapon is always true to its affiliation. If the character is not true, or there is a problem with them being at cross purposes, then there will be a personality conflict where the weapon is basically in control, fighting for control with the character. A character's ego is equal to his or her intelligence and wisdom added together. This figure is reduced by half the wisdom score if the character has half or less of his or her hit points remaining, which stands to reason. If you are sick, if you are injured, you're not functioning at your full capacity, you are not going to be able to have the same sort of will and intelligence to contend with this thing in your hand, which doesn't get sick and doesn't get tired and is constantly driven by its purpose. When a personality conflict occurs, the possessor's ego is compared to the weapon ego. If the weapon has a higher ego score, not the same, but higher, the character must make a saving throw versus spells. Failure of this save means that the weapon takes control of the character. If the save is made, the weapon can force another such check each round until the roll is failed or until the character releases the weapon, including sheathing it. Of course, if the weapon Of course, if the situation which is causing the weapon to seek control passes before the wielder fails to save, the weapon will stop trying to take control. So it's not a constant battle of wills. That is the sort of thing that would be punishing, torturing your players, which is never good. But because it has a purpose, it has an affiliation, it was created for, to either bring justice or to vanquish evil, in the proximity of opportunities to accomplish either or, that is going to be a challenge point, and you have to have the math there ready to be able to make those calculations to determine what happens. So should there be a loss of control that lasts for 1 day, or until a critical situation occurs, such as a major battle, a serious threat to either the weapon or the character, and so on, which forces another personality conflict to be made. So even if the player is under the control of a weapon temporarily, if some dangerous situation, they're critically low on hit points, there's an enemy approaching, there's a disaster or some urgent situation is happening, the player can also be able to fight back a little bit and challenge, well, the situation demands it, that you recheck that to see whether, under these new circumstances, now who's in control. Should a weapon gain control, the character behaves as if charmed, doing the weapon's will. And should the player get control back, well, they go back to doing what they will, at least as long as it's within the expectations or the desires of the weapon. Removal of associates or items whose goals so these are the weapon's will. These are examples. I'm getting ahead of myself. So some of the things that may be part of the weapon's will include removal of associates or items whose goals or personality are distasteful to the item. So causing the character to give away all other magic items or items of a certain type. Immediately seeking out and slaying creatures hateful to the weapon. So yeah, I've decided that my special purpose is not being met. We're going to go out and hunt undead. How do you feel about that? Oh wait, I'm in control for the next 24 hours. Immediately seeking out and slaying creatures, yes, causing the creature to relinquish the weapon in favor of a more suitable possessor due to personality differences or conduct. Or it could be just suitability. I could say a whole lot about making items temporary in players' hands, but I'm going to devote a separate video to just that subject because I can talk at length, and I will. Hopefully not too long for your attention. I'll try to be interesting. I will. Forcing its possessor into combat. Okay, yeah, like I said, you're trying to escape because you need to get healing, and it's deciding, nope, we're going ahead. Forcing its possessor to surrender to an opponent. Maybe this opponent is a preferred wielder. Causing the character to drop the weapon. Yeah. Without having to resort to superheating or electricity or anything like that, it could just make that request, let me go. So naturally, okay, here we're trying to make peace again. Thanks, Chris. Naturally, such actions are unlikely when harmony reigns between the characters and the item's affiliations. And yeah, as the DM, if you do a good match between the demands that are going to be made on the character or the party by the upcoming adventure and the inclinations of the weapon, it may be a very harmonious marriage between people with similar or same goals. Even so, an item may wish, and again, maybe this is an opportunity for them to part the ways at the end. If the next demands made on that player or party go against what this weapon, what its own priorities are. Even so, an item may wish to have a lesser character possess it in order to easily establish and maintain dominance. Oh, that's interesting. So you're too intelligent. You're too much in control. This weapon may look for an opportunity, maybe when you're wounded, maybe when you're sick, your wisdom score is low, your ego score is diminished. To try to put itself in the hands of either a lesser character or a different possessor in order to get its, in order to have its mandate taken care of, to get its goals accomplished. All magic items with personalities desire to play an important role in whatever activity is underway, particularly combat. Such items are rivals of each other. So, hypothetically, and I do not necessarily recommend this, if you had more than one intelligent weapon within a group of, like an adventuring party, they could be friends with each other. They could hate each other. And there might be a lot of challenging with those weapons trying to gain control over their respective wielders in order to attack each other. And yeah. And when I say each other, basically putting the characters at risk because they're the wielders. So anyway. No sentient weapon wants to share its wielder with others. Okay. And this conflict can happen even if they have the same affiliation. Oh gosh. They're catty. I'm the one here that's more important with slaying undead. There isn't room for both of us. So many possibilities. I love this. Items with personalities are never totally controlled or silenced by the characters who possess them, even though the items may never successfully control their possessors. So, unless the player and the weapon are of like mind, any perceived harmony is an illusion. It's temporary. It's just a question of, well, in all the times that I've challenged you for control, you've managed to beat me. But this item doesn't sleep. This item doesn't get tired. This item doesn't get sick. And yeah, it will have its way. It will have its day. So I hope you've appreciated this. I certainly enjoyed it.